The night was heavy in Washington. It was supposed to be just another Thursday press briefing, but what happened next shocked the entire country. Marjorie Taylor Greene, bold, loud, and always looking for attention, walked up to the podium. Her face looked stern. The room got quiet. Something didn't feel right. "Vice President J.D. Vance has forgotten who he is," she said, her voice sharp like broken glass. "He's grown weak, soft. He no longer stands for us." Reporters gasped. Some looked at each other, stunned. It was a direct shot, a public betrayal. J.D. wasn't even in the room. TV networks cut live. Social media exploded. Her words weren't just bold, they were personal and cruel. People were confused. J.D. Vance had just visited a tornado-hit town in Kentucky, hugging crying mothers, helping rebuild schools, and showing up where no cameras were. That didn't sound weak. But Greene kept going. She accused him of siding with elites and said he was no longer the fighter we once knew. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And deep inside the White House, J.D. Vance sat still, watching it unfold on a silent TV screen. His hands were trembling, but not with fear. The camera lights were off. Inside the vice president's office, J.D. Vance sat alone. The walls around him were thick with silence. His phone buzzed non-stop, texts, missed calls, notifications, but he ignored them all. He looked down at a picture on his desk. It was a photo of his mom and him as a kid in Middletown, Ohio, back when they had barely enough to eat, when life was hard but real. He remembered those days clearly. They made him who he was. J.D. had fought hard to become vice president, not for power, but to protect people like his mom. And now he was being called soft, disloyal. A tear slid down his cheek. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was hurt. Hurt that someone from his own side could attack him so deeply, so publicly. Then his wife Usha walked in. She didn't say a word. She just wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "You didn't change." They did. That moment, it was like oxygen to a drowning man. But J.D. knew what was coming next. This wasn't just politics. This was war. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the one people should fear the most. Within hours, America exploded. Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. Everywhere, people were either defending Greene or tearing her apart. Some said she spoke the truth. Others were outraged. But what no one saw coming was the response from her own supporters. People in Georgia began calling into conservative talk shows. "I used to love Marjorie," one woman sobbed on air, "but how dare she talk about J.D. Vance that way? That man showed up when our church burned down. He prayed with us." Another caller added, "I don't care what she says. Vance was there when my son died in Afghanistan. He wrote me a letter, a real one." Even Fox News hosts were caught off guard. Tucker Carlson looked almost stunned on camera. This might be the first time I've seen the base turn on Marjorie. This could get ugly." Behind closed doors, Republican leaders scrambled. The party was splitting in two, and fast. But through it all, J.D. Vance said nothing. Not a tweet, not a post, not a word. He just kept working, visiting hospitals, veterans, and food banks. And slowly, quietly, the country started to wonder, what if the man they tried to break was the only one still standing? For 2 days, J.D. Vance said nothing. No press conference, no tweet, no official response, just silence. In today's world, silence is loud, deafening even. Pundits begged him to speak. Supporters filled his inbox with prayers. Opponents mocked him, thinking his silence meant defeat. But J.D. was not hiding. He was grieving. That same week, a soldier named Caleb, a 22-year-old Marine J.D. had met during a campaign stop in Ohio, was killed in a training accident. J.D. quietly flew to the family's home in Dayton. No cameras, no press, just him, sitting on their worn-out couch, holding Caleb's mother's hand as she wept. He stayed for hours. They shared stories. He even played Caleb's favorite country song from his phone and cried with them. Later that night, he sat alone at the airport, hoodie over his head, unnoticed. While Greene's team was flooding cable news, JD was comforting a broken family. That's who he was. No spotlight, no noise, just action. And slowly, Americans began to see the truth. Leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and full of heart. It was a foggy morning when the video dropped. JD's team uploaded a quiet 3-minute clip titled, "A Letter to the American People." No music, no fancy edits, just JD Vance sitting on a wooden bench outside the Lincoln Memorial, wearing a simple jacket. His voice was calm. "I've been called soft. I've been called a traitor. But I haven't changed. I still believe in hard work, in faith, in the forgotten towns where no one wants to go anymore." He paused. "I was raised by a single mom who struggled with addiction. I didn't grow up in Washington. I grew up in broken places, and I want to fight for those places." He looked into the camera. "If that's weakness, then I'm proud to be weak." By the time the video ended, millions had watched. Thousands were already crying in the comments. One veteran wrote, "I lost my legs in Afghanistan. JD visited me without cameras. Greene has no clue what strength looks like." Another mom posted, "My son took his life last year. JD sent me flowers and prayed with me. That's real." This wasn't politics anymore. This was personal, and the country was listening. Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't expect this. She thought she had control, that the headlines would cheer her bravery, that the base would turn on JD. Instead, her own events started going sideways. At a town hall in Texas, someone stood up and shouted, "Where were you during the Kentucky floods? JD was there." A woman in the front row held up her phone, playing JD's emotional video. Greene tried to brush it off, but something had shifted. Even her closest donors were going silent. Rumors swirled that several were now backing JD quietly, calling him the future of true conservatism. One of her aides leaked a text. "We underestimated him. He's winning hearts, fast." But Greene didn't stop. A week after Greene's attack, JD Vance quietly announced he'd be speaking at a small town in rural Tennessee, Springfield, population 17,000. No hype, no grand title, just, "Come talk with JD." No one expected the turnout. What started as a modest local event turned into something breathtaking. Over 30,000 people showed up, many driving across state lines. Farmers, nurses, war veterans, young moms with strollers, even former Greene supporters stood shoulder to shoulder. When JD walked onto that simple wooden stage, people didn't scream. They wept. "Y'all didn't come here for politics," he began. "You came because you want someone who sees you, who hears you. And I do." He didn't mention Greene once. Instead, he told stories of visiting foster kids in Oklahoma, of praying with a coal miner's widow in West Virginia, of the promise he made to himself as a broken boy in Middletown, to never forget the forgotten. By the time he finished, the crowd was silent, then erupted in tears and cheers. The clip went viral, over 20 million views in 24 hours. And Marjorie Taylor Greene? She didn't say a word, because this rally had changed everything. At 10:47 p.m., JD's phone rang. Caller ID. Unknown, Palm Beach. He answered quietly. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through, direct and gravelly. "JD, it's Trump." Silence. Then the former president spoke again. "I've been watching, everyone has. You handled that like a lion. Cool, collected, real." JD stayed respectful, but careful. "Thanks, sir," Trump continued. "Look, I like Marjorie, but what she did, that was reckless. You didn't hit back. You rose above. That's what leaders do." There was a pause. Then Trump said something JD didn't expect. "I'm telling my people to cool it. You've got momentum, don't lose it." JD exhaled. That moment, off camera, unseen by the public, shifted the power dynamics in the party. Behind closed doors, Trump insiders began pulling back support from Greene's circle. Top donors began redirecting funds. Fox News anchors started changing their tone. JD didn't ask for any of this. He didn't chase power. But his grace under fire was doing what shouting never could. He was quietly becoming the soul of a shaken movement. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a small smile. Late one evening, JD was reviewing security briefings when his chief of staff walked in holding a worn, tear-stained envelope. "Sir, you need to read this." Inside was a handwritten letter from a 9-year-old girl named Ellie in Kentucky. It read, "Dear Mr. Vance, my daddy died last year in the floods. You came to our school and held my hand. You told me I was brave. I didn't believe you then, but I do now. I saw that lady being mean to you on TV. She doesn't know you like I do. You're the bravest man I've ever met. Please don't stop helping people like me. Love, Ellie." JD's hands trembled. He set the letter down and wiped his eyes. This was why he never fought back with insults. This was why he never shouted. Because every time he chose dignity over drama, a little girl like Ellie watched, and she believed. In that moment, JD made a decision. He would go to Greene's home district, not to fight, but to remind her and the nation who the Republican Party was supposed to be fighting for. JD Vance didn't take security detail when he went to Rome, Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. It was a quiet Thursday, no fanfare, no national press, just JD in a Navy windbreaker, walking the streets, visiting diners, churches, and local veterans' halls. His goal wasn't optics, it was listening. At Tommy's Truck Stop Diner, a man stood up, beard, MAGA hat, voice shaking. "I used to be all in for Marjorie," he said, eyes locked on JD. "But something changed. You remind me of my brother. He died in Fallujah. Quiet, steady, always showed up." The room fell silent. JD nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss. He sounds like a man worth remembering." Outside, someone placed a hand on JD's shoulder. It was Linda, a retired schoolteacher. She whispered, "We're tired of shouting. You're different. Don't stop." By day's end, what started as a quiet walk had turned into something electric. People in Greene's district, her people, were beginning to rethink everything. And somewhere deep inside her office, Greene was watching the footage go viral. And for the first time, she looked afraid. That night, JD sat down for an exclusive interview with a small local Georgia station. The setting was simple, just him, a worn couch, and a fireplace crackling softly in the background. No handlers, no script. Halfway through the interview, the reporter asked, "Mr. Vice President, do you ever feel like you're losing yourself in all this noise?" JD paused. For once, words didn't come easily. Then, slowly, he pulled out a small folded photo from his coat. It was of his mother, Bev, taken just months before she died of a heroin overdose. She had finally gotten clean. JD had helped her find peace. And then, life had other plans. He looked up, eyes glossy. "I promised her I wouldn't become what I used to hate. And I've failed before, but I'm trying, every day." A tear slipped down his cheek. The cameraman, behind the lens, was crying too. The clip aired that night, then spread. Millions watched. People commented things like, "I don't care about politics. This man is human, and I believe him." And just like that, JD Vance wasn't just a political figure anymore. He became a mirror for America's quiet pain. The next morning, Greene scheduled a Freedom First rally in Dalton, Georgia. She came out swinging, calling JD a polished traitor, accusing him of being a puppet for the establishment, and mocking his recent interview. But something was off. The cheers were duller. The crowd looked uncomfortable. Then, in the middle of her rant, a teenage boy, barely 17, stood up, trembling with a handmade sign. "I lost my mom too, Marjorie. JD Vance gave me hope." Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. Greene froze. She tried to dismiss the moment, but the air had shifted. People were no longer nodding. They were whispering, quietly leaving. By that evening, the video of the boy went more viral than Greene's entire speech. Twitter exploded. TikTok was flooded with stitches of teens and veterans and single moms all saying the same thing: JD speaks for us. Even longtime conservatives began tweeting things like, "Maybe it's time for a new kind of leader." And behind the scenes, something bigger was brewing. A movement was forming. Not loud, not angry, just real and unstoppable. The envelope had no return address. It was hand-delivered to the vice president's office just days after his emotional Georgia trip. JD Vance opened it slowly, expecting another political memo. But it wasn't that. Inside was a folded note, written in careful, uneven handwriting. "Dear Mr. Vance, my brother killed himself last week. He was a Marine. Watched your interview. Said he finally saw a leader who didn't pretend. He wrote your name on his last letter home. Thank you for giving him peace in his final days. Emily M." JD didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at the letter, hands trembling. It was too much. The pain, the weight, the responsibility. He stood, walked to his private prayer room, and shut the door. That night he didn't tweet. He didn't campaign. He didn't even eat. He sat in silence, wrestling with the reality that public service was no longer about winning arguments. It was about souls. And suddenly, Greene's voice, her accusations, they felt small, petty, insignificant. Because while she played politics, JD was holding the broken pieces of real lives in his hands. At 6:42 a.m., JD's phone rang. It was Jason Miller, Trump's longtime advisor. The voice on the other end was unusually quiet. "JD, we've got a situation." Apparently, Greene had privately called Trump and tried to pressure him into publicly rebuking JD for being soft. But Trump refused. Not only that, he hadn't returned any of her calls since the Georgia incident. "Marjorie's furious," Miller said, and scared. JD exhaled. "Why are you telling me this?" Miller paused. "Because there's a shift coming. A lot of people are watching you now, and some of us think it might be your moment." That call wasn't about gossip. It was a signal. JD Vance, the man who once stood quietly behind cameras and podiums, was being seen as something more than a vice president. He was becoming the face of a new path, one defined not by rage, but by redemption. Later that evening, Greene lashed out on X, formerly Twitter, posting a fiery video. "I don't care what JD Vance thinks, he's not MAGA anymore." But it backfired again. Even former MAGA diehards were commenting. If he's not MAGA, maybe it's MAGA that needs to change. The ground was shifting. And Greene? She was sinking. That weekend, JD Vance canceled his Washington events. Instead, he flew to Cincinnati. No press, no speeches. He went straight to Mercy General Hospital. Emily, the young woman who'd written him the heartbreaking letter, was there. Her parents were too. They hadn't expected the Vice President of the United States to show up. But JD sat down with them like an old family friend. He listened to stories about her brother, Nathan, a prankster, a protector, a patriot. Then he knelt beside Emily and placed something in her hand. His mother's recovery coin, the one she had carried for 3 years. "She told me to pass it on to someone who still had a fight left in them," he said. Emily broke down. So did her parents. And for those 15 minutes there were no cameras, No policies, no red or blue lines, just a man trying to carry the weight of his country's pain. Outside, one nurse recorded the moment through a slightly cracked door. She uploaded it to Facebook. It exploded overnight. This is what real leadership looks like. And millions agreed. Because in a world screaming for attention, J.D. Vance was showing what it meant to show up quietly and with heart. The sky over Chillicothe, Ohio was gray and heavy. Nathan's funeral wasn't supposed to be national news. It was small, intimate, just family, friends, and a community in mourning. But then the black SUV pulled up. J.D. Vance stepped out. No cameras, no speeches, just a black coat, red eyes, and the weight of something bigger than politics. He sat beside Emily, held her hand during the service, and when the folded flag was handed to Nathan's mother, J.D. whispered, "He mattered." As the service ended, a local veteran stood and asked J.D. to say a few words, not as vice president, but as someone who understood loss. J.D. stood at the front of the small church, hands shaking. "I've lost friends. I've seen pain up close. But what breaks me is this, how we turn grief into noise, into blame, into politics." He paused, "and forget the real cost." There was not a dry eye in the room. The video, once again recorded quietly by someone in the back, went viral within hours. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. And for millions, it felt like the first time a leader finally told the truth. It was meant to be her comeback. Marjorie Taylor Greene scheduled a fiery press conference outside Capitol Hill, banners waving behind her, "Protect conservative values." But something was different. The crowd was smaller, the cheers were faint, and online, the comments were brutal. "You tried to destroy a good man." J.D. stood with a grieving family. "You stood with your ego." MAGA isn't about rage anymore. As Greene launched into her usual attacks, a reporter interrupted. "Congresswoman, how do you respond to veterans calling J.D. Vance the only one listening?" Her face froze. Then another question. "Do you regret targeting the vice president after seeing how the country responded to his compassion?" She stammered. For the first time in years, she looked rattled. Back at the White House, J.D. Vance watched the coverage in silence. A staffer asked if he wanted to issue a statement. He shook his head. No need to dance on ashes. In just 3 weeks, public opinion had shifted, not through a scandal, not through a stunt, but through quiet strength, steady presence, and the courage to carry other people's pain. And for the first time, J.D. Vance wasn't just respected, he was beloved. 3 weeks after the chaos, J.D. Vance took the stage at the Lincoln Memorial for a unity event. Over 5 million watched live. He looked out over the crowd, veterans, single mothers, young conservatives, independents, even Democrats. He didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a human being. "I don't have all the answers," he said, voice low, "but I know what it means to be broken. I know what it means to be angry. And I know what it means to feel like no one hears you." He paused. "But we don't fix our country by yelling louder. We fix it by listening harder, by showing up not to win, but to heal." The applause was thunderous. J.D. Vance walked off stage not just as vice president, but as the soul of a changing America. If this story moved you, if you felt that lump in your throat, if your eyes welled up, don't scroll away just yet. Like this video to help it reach someone who needs hope. Comment below with how this story made you feel. We read everyone. Subscribe if you believe in a politics that heals, not divides. Because together, we're building something different, something real.